and welcome back to Radio NIGP, where the theme for the month is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the Spotlight. Thank you for joining us. In today's broadcast, we're going to be exploring the importance of supplier diversity and how it benefits our communities. Supplier diversity, or DEI, focus on partnering with smaller businesses, principally those owned by underrepresented individuals, for procurement needs. By actively engaging with these smaller enterprises, we not only promote inclusivity and equity, but also stimulate economic growth within our communities. This sort of strategy creates investment opportunities, it generates local jobs, and it fosters a positive ripple effect that strengthens our society and communities as a whole. Join us as we dive into the significant impact of DEI and supplier diversity. So stay tuned, and thank you for spending some time with us.
Hi, this is Tara Acton with Radio NIGP, and I'm here with the Hot Topics team. We're excited to be interviewing Art Moore. He is this year's most recent recipient of the Ella Pierce Diversity and Inclusion Award. Art also serves as the Chief Procurement Officer for the Capital Development Board of Illinois, and we'll just get right in.
Okay. Art, first, thanks for being here and congratulations on your award. Can you give us just kind of a brief overview of the equity and inclusion program that you've got going and kind of where it came from, how it started, what you got?
Absolutely. The state of Illinois has identified equity and inclusion programs as being a top priority in public procurement. So much so that recently they established a commission for equity and inclusion that houses the Business Enterprise Program, which is the woman minority-owned business program that really promotes contracting opportunities for vendors owned by those individuals, while also implementing a requirement for training programs. Each of the 4 chief procurement officers are charged with putting together diversity and inclusion training that is then to be presented to the various procurement officers throughout the state. That allows them to really look at and own the procurement process and what its impact is on those communities. In my office, one of the things that we found out was that in the state of Illinois, we have a pre-qualification process. So we vet our contractors prior to them receiving awards and contracts to do construction projects in the state of Illinois to make sure that they can complete those projects and that we minimize risk on those projects. So one of the things that we look to do is the only way we can really increase that vendor pool is to increase capacity. So we're looking at ways of increasing that capacity, but also being fair in the contracting opportunity. So we always talk about turning lemons into lemonade. Well, that is what we tried to do during the pandemic when we needed zero airflow rooms in some of our human services facilities. What we tried to do during the emergency purchase process is we tried to bring in some diverse contractors to really give them the opportunity to be a prime contractor instead of a subcontractor. These opportunities afforded them the ability to increase their buying capacity and therefore being able to bid on projects in the future as a prime contractor on a continuous basis. We're not just looking at numbers. We're not just looking at goals. We're looking at opportunities. We're looking at not only increasing opportunities in the woman and minority-owned business world, but we're also increasing the bidder pool. So then we also increase competition. So it's not just a one-off. It's a greater good for the state of Illinois.
So, Art, from a layman's perspective, I mean, I think it's great what you guys are doing, but why should we care?
Well, I think it's important to understand your community. So, for example, if you're in the city of Chicago, what's that community look like? And that the community is providing the taxpayer dollars that are supporting these projects. So the thought process, the rule of thumb is that if the community is providing these tax dollars, should they not also benefit from these tax dollars? And should they not do so in an equitable fashion? So that's kind of the charge that's been given to us by the General Assembly, is that how do we make sure that those dollars that we are spending, that we are receiving from those communities, are making their way back into those communities? So if they don't have an equal share or an equal opportunity at those taxpayer dollars, how can we kind of change the narrative? How can we change what that looks like and how that impacts our communities? So as public stewards of taxpayer dollars, I think it's important for us to know that when we're spending money, not only are we building something that people can use in the future, not only buying goods, buying paper, buying services, but we're also economic drivers in our community. So we should take ownership in the fact that if we're economic drivers in our community, that we impact those who we represent. So even as public servants, even though we're not elected officials, we still represent those communities. So how are we increasing that involvement? How are we increasing that market share? So I just think that the sooner we can really own that and adopt that mindset, the faster we get away from, oh, this is just an administrative burden. This is more so something that I own, and this is something I'm taking pride in.
So Art, first of all, it's really good to see you informed back in August, and congratulations again. So, what you're doing, what your team is doing is fantastic. I think we all need to jump in. You said about taxpayer dollars, for me, that is like the biggest thing. I always treat it like it's my own checkbook. It's hard to get buy-in sometimes from your stakeholders. So like, what did you find or see, or you're still continuing to see, your biggest obstacles or challenges to help sustain this?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind, and I stated this a little bit in my acceptance speech, and I really did enjoy the opportunity to have that platform to really talk about what this means to me, what this award means to me, what these programs mean to me. And it really goes back to this adage of see it, be it in my mind. And that is seeing the change that you're looking to implement and really owning that change. So how do we do that? How do we receive that buy-in? Well, I always go back to ownership. So I thanked my team when I got up on stage, because my team allowed me to identify my vision, and they afforded me the opportunity to buy into that vision. The Capital Development Board in the state of Illinois was partners at the same time. So they saw the benefit as well. And I tell people all the time, one of the things I love the most about my job is being able to go to outreach events, being able to go and meet new vendors, because it puts a face to a contractor. It's just not contractor ABC. You get to see Mr. So-and-so, who is the owner of contractor ABC. And then it puts a face to that business. And when it does that, it humanizes what we do. There's so many times that we're just looking at the rules and the regulations and the contract requirements, and we're not really understanding what the impact of those requirements are. So what better way to do that than to actually step out in the community and have those conversations? So one of the things that is really frustrating in the state of Illinois that we hear is that we have too many platforms, too many websites, too many business requirements. So how can we minimize that? Because not only does that impact our day-to-day contractors, but it is impacting that small, diverse business on a continual basis. So how can we make things easier? So in the state of Illinois, we created the Illinois Procurement Gateway, which is a one-stop shop that allows vendors to complete all the administrative paperwork on the front side, so that they have all that done. So that in essence stops you from being deemed non-responsive for a basic mistake that you might not have known, but that it was a state law that unfortunately we have no control over. So what we wanted to do was eliminate that all at once, so that when you come to the table, just your bid, just your RFP proposal, just your response is what we're reviewing. So that's what we like to do, is we like to get out there and hear and listen and find out from the community what's impacting their ability to do business with the state of Illinois.
I think you kind of address like small things that you can do. Even if you don't have the buy-in of your board or your leadership, there are things that we can do as procurement folks that can help impact these things, even without some kind of formal directive. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, Art. Thank you to our listeners for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on Radio NIGP.
Hello, and welcome to the October segment of Legally Speaking. My name is Kirk Buffington, and I am one of the 4 Legally Speaking contributors. This segment is intended to give a brief overview of one of the most important court cases influencing an agency's ability to implement a diversity, equity, inclusion program. The case is Richmond v. J.O. Croson and was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1989. At the time, the city of Richmond had in place an ordinance that required a 30% set aside to 1 or more MBEs for procurements. The procurement at issue in this case was for providing and installing plumbing fixtures for a new city jail. Croson determined that 75% of the value of the contract was going to be in the provision of the fixtures. Therefore, in order to meet the set-aside program, Croson would need to purchase fixtures from a qualified MBE. Croson contacted 6 MBEs, none of which expressed an interest in supplying. On the date when bids were due, Croson had failed to obtain a quote for providing those fixtures from any qualified MBE. Croson requested a waiver of the MBE requirement, which was denied by the city. Failing the receiving of any qualified bids, the city decided to rebid the project. Croson's protest at the same time was denied, and the city moved forward with a rebid. Shortly thereafter, Croson filed suit in federal court, contending that the city's ordinance was unconstitutional, violated the 14th Amendment. The federal district court found the plan as written and supported by the city's own studies to be reasonable and denied Croson's suit. On appeal, the appeals court affirmed the lower district court's ruling, and the ordinance stood. Croson then appealed that appeals court decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, which vacated the appeals court decision and remanded the case back to the appellate court for further consideration. On remand, the appeals court struck down the city's ordinance, finding it to be unconstitutional and in violation of the 14th Amendment. The court stated that the city had failed to demonstrate a compelling interest and reason in enacting the 30% set-aside quota. At this point, the city then appealed the appellate decision back to the U.S. Supreme Court, which concurred with the lower ruling. The city's plan was struck down to be found unconstitutional. The court had found that the city failed to demonstrate any significant disparity in its own contracting, and in absent from that showing, the city's plan violated the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. The city's race-conscious contracting program had failed because the program did not demonstrate that compelling governmental interest in apportioning contracting opportunities on the basis of race. And its remedy was not narrowly tailored to correct past discrimination. So for those reasons, from 1986 to today, agencies find that in order to have support for their minority programs, they need to conduct a disparity study which supports a compelling governmental interest, and also, just as important, whatever the remedy is, it has to be narrowly tailored to support the program. Now, although there are cases making their way through the federal courts that may change this standard, until that time, agencies need to be sure that their programs are narrowly tailored and correct past statistically valid discrimination. Thank you for your time. Until our next segment, thanks for listening. And this is Radio NIGP.
Hello, and welcome to Construction Junction. In the spirit of this month's topic, let's discuss how disadvantaged business enterprise programs are used in construction procurement. For many of us, the use of DBE in construction occurs when a project is federally funded. An area of construction procurement that's commonly affected by this is transportation-related construction projects. The Federal Department of Transportation conducts its own DBE certification process, so you need to encourage your potential DBE suppliers to get certified as a recognized DBE in that program. The Federal Department of Transportation website states that it's the department's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program is designed to remedy ongoing discrimination and the continuing effects of past discrimination in federally assisted highway, transit, airport, and highway safety financial assistance transportation contracting markets nationwide. The primary remedial goal and objective of the DBA program is to level the playing field by providing small businesses owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals a fair opportunity to compete for federally funded transportation projects. It also has the 8 objectives of ensuring non-discrimination in the award and administration of Department of Transportation assisted contracts, to create a level playing field in which DBEs can compete fairly for Department of Transportation assisted contracts, to ensure that the department's DBE program is narrowly tailored in accordance with the applicable law, to ensure that only firms that fully meet this part's eligibility standards are permitted to participate as DBEs, to help remove barriers to the participation of the DBEs in Department of Transportation assisted contracts, to promote the use of DBEs in all types of federally assisted contracts and procurement activities conducted by recipients, to assist the development of firms that can compete successfully in the marketplace outside of the DBE program, and finally, to provide appropriate flexibility to recipients of federal financial assistance in establishing and providing opportunities for DBEs. These goals are similar in other non-transportation related federally funded projects as well. The role procurement plays in assuring that the awarded contractor is meeting these objectives may vary amongst public entities, but ultimately it is procurement's responsibility to ensure that the identified DBE suppliers are performing the work on the awarded projects. This is often done via on-site visits and following up by documenting into the contract file. Keep in mind that the use of DBEs can help your local economy, as many of the participating DBEs may be businesses in your area. This is a good way to get local support for large construction projects. That's all for this episode. We'll see you again soon for Construction Junction on Radio NIGP.
Hello and welcome to Radio NIGP. This segment is Deeper Dive, Making a Splash. And my name is Bobby Tolston, and I'm joined here today by 2 wonderful colleagues, Kristen Webb and Stacey Adams. Thank you, ladies, for joining me today. So during today's show, we're going to talk about supplier diversity and minority business enterprise programs. So I'd like to start off by just throwing this question out there, and either one of you ladies can answer this. Based upon your experience with minority business programs, what are some of the changes and challenges you're seeing that are different from just, say, 5 years ago?
Well, if you don't mind, Kristen, I'll jump on this one first and then we'll tag and you can take a minute. I think our small and minority businesses are really getting hit with the same thing we're all experiencing in today's economy. We have rising costs that are associated with labor. We have inflation, cost of raw materials is going up. And unfortunately for our small and minority businesses, they can't absorb that like a large corporation can. And so unfortunately, what we're finding is a lot of small and minority businesses are getting hit really hard during today's economy and are really struggling to keep their doors open. And that's what I see as the greatest challenge than what we've had, because we as society are facing that as a whole.
Yes, great point, Stacey. I know that in my experience prior to COVID, a couple of things we did to help minority businesses to kind of bridge that gap we had partnering relationships where we had outreach programs where we would bring majority firms in to partner with the minority firms to help build their capacity. And we found that we got a lot of success out of creating those partnerships. What do you think about that, Stacey? Do you think that's something that could perhaps help during this difficult time?
Yes, collaborating. I call that collaborating, right? With those larger firms, setting up those mentorships and those networks that you can build off to help you grow and develop and to kind of lock arms to where you're both being successful in this, right? Because those larger companies, they're still battling those labor issues and things of that nature. Whereas if, they partner together, everybody gets a win-win, right? So we put my labor with your labor, and now we've got a stronger team as a result.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the things that we tried to ensure was that those relationships lasted beyond our contract, right? We wanted them to build sustainable relationships where they could collaborate and partner on other projects and help continue that smaller firm to grow. So thank you so much for that. So, Kristen, you want to tag on that one? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest changes I've seen in, say, the last 15 years, going with that timeline, has been a larger or greater amount of attention going towards minority and women-owned or minority businesses altogether, and that participation still having some restrictiveness to it. Right, because supply diversity has been around for decades. However, there is still some restrictiveness, specifically when I hear the voice of the supplier. A lot of times it's more of, the education and their awareness. So when we speak to outreach, I have seen where outreach is increasing, but I would definitely say one of the challenges would be the continuity of that outreach, or coming up with more robust and creative and innovative ways to garner some of that attention, right? We've seen an increase in reverse trade shows. We've seen an increase in those subcontractor participation requirements that you all mentioned, even where there's the mandate of joint ventures sometimes to ensure primes are tagging on subcontractors. So a lot of those changes are happening, but I think there's this continued need to continue making it aware, and that's bringing all parties to the table and having that continual and intentional education there. Some of the other things I thought about, some of the challenges is change. Some entities that once upon a time was not looking at supply diversity are now having to look at it, or they're being encouraged to do it, right? And so getting entities to want to change and to get that buy-in has obviously, it will continue to be a challenge, just anytime you're trying to get people to change their mind. But we need that buy-in so that your processes and your policies can be effectively structured to be able to support it. And I would be remiss if I don't mention current legislation, even at the federal level, that has started to change the landscape of what supply diversity can and can't do. I know here in my state, specifically a year and a half ago, it was on the floor to remove supply diversity programming, or make it not in compliance with law. Let me say it that way. And so that has come off of the table, but we know at the federal level, affirmative action, things like that are changing. And so we will start to see that trickle down, or we are starting to see that trickle down into supply diversity programming, which makes the change and the buy-in even harder, right? Which makes us go to the point of having to create that awareness and that outreach so that people understand the value and the impact that it makes to not just that agency, but I always like to say to the enterprise, right, to the entire world. That does make the difference. And so I'll digress because I could go on and on, but
it's okay. It's okay. You're in the right place to have this discussion. So one of the challenges that some agencies are facing is having the funds to be able to support a disparity study, because in order to have a program that's enforceable, you have to have completed a diversity study. So Stacey, talk to me a little bit about your experience with with diversity studies.
Well, honestly, I think, we were talking about this earlier as well. I think some places are killing it, right? This is at top of mind. They see that this is worth investing in, whereas my sister agency right next door may not. right? And so it gets real hard to have a true and accurate full picture when we're not singing from that same piece of music, right? Or when one agency's like, well, I'm just not going to look and not participate as this isn't a priority for me. I'm not going to invest here. I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to let my voice be heard. And it kind of skews the results, I think, for all of us, right? When you think about it that way, we're not able to get the full picture we need to have to make the best decisions that we need to make. And it should be that we all should be investing in this and really spending so that we can have that clear picture and really know what do we do with it now that we know, because that knowledge comes power, right? Then you can make the best decisions instead of a guess and a wing and a prayer, which is never the best way to do it at all.
Not in any form, right? Personal or professional.
Yeah, but I loved what Kristen said when we were talking about, the importance of doing the disparity study. So I hope we can go and she'll chime back in as well and let everybody benefit from that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I want to ask you, Kristen, is where do you see the correlation between disparity studies and DEI?
Absolutely. One, I see disparity studies as the legal way and the most complying way to make sure that you can execute these programs. So I always start there. But then when we tie it into DEI, I think it's supporting the whole entire idea of ensuring that your business model or the services that we provide include the diversity of not just the communities that are around us, but those beyond us as well.
Yes.
That we represent as governmental agencies. And that diversity then helps to close that gap. When we talk about disparity studies, that's the intent of them to identify is if there is a gap, but then also if once we identify it, how do we close it? How do we create that equity that we see in that we see in the E of DEI? And then obviously doing those two things, addressing the diversity and addressing the equity of our supply diversity program helps to support inclusion of all of the game players, all of the stakeholders, including the citizens, as well as the internal customers. So that would be my tie and what I see the importance of DEI and how it is correlated to what procurement does every day with supply diversity.
Well said. Thank you so much for, we were trying to figure out how to wrap our conversation around bringing that in, and you did an excellent job with doing that. So, Stacy, what are some of the ways that these programs have improved, and what are some areas that need to be improved upon?
Well, you touched on it as well with the collaborating with the larger firms. Setting up the mentorship programs so that they can learn how to overcome those barriers to entry that we can often have in public sector, right? So teaching them how to respond, teaching them what to look for, really helping them to grow. So I think that's some of the things that we've improved on, but we still need to continue to do better. I think another thing that we need to do is to help them grow their social capital, if you will. So helping to build their networks, helping to, strengthen with other business owners that they know so that they can, again, collaborate and join in together so that they can have a stronger and larger footprint than individually they could have alone. That would be what I'd really say that is going well, but still needs to continue. Train, empower, and collaborate, make those connections. Social capital goes a long way.
And Stacy, you hit the nail on the head. I've been involved with these programs for over 20 years, and that continues to be the changes and challenges from years ago. And we just have to stay diligent, right?
Yes.
So go ahead, Kristen, and close us out. What would you say to that?
The only last note I had was just ensuring that engagement takes place as early on, whether you have a disparity study in place that really draws and allows for you to engage with goals. I think early engagement, making opportunities known as early as you possibly can so that minority businesses that may not be able to have capacity right then can build on that with where they can. So making debriefings even known ahead of time so that they know there's an opportunity to gain strength in their proposal by hearing from the agency. So that would just be my only last point if I had to offer anything else to support just earlier engagement so that we can continue to be proactive in all the ways that you all just touched on. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much for joining a deeper dive. And for our audience, please stay tuned. There's much more information that we'll share with you in the rest of the program. Thank you so much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Hello and welcome to Way to Grow, an NIGP mentorship moment. So this month, all of us here at NIGP Radio reflecting on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in our workplace. And our segment today is going to explore some thoughts about how to grow a DEI program in your entity. So I'm happy today to be joined by Lourdes Koss, who is a former procurement official and currently the principal of ML Koss and Associates. And she's had a lot of experience growing DEI programs and helping others to grow DEI programs. So Lourdes, welcome to Way to Grow.
Thank you, Keith. And I really appreciate the invitation. So it's always a joy collaborating with you. So thank you for having me.
It certainly is. I agree with that. So Lourdes, I know that you worked in a number of organizations which have had these types of programs. Could you please give us a little summary of your experience with DEI programs in general?
Well, Keith, yes, I dealt with DEI programs throughout my entire procurement career. And as a former chief procurement officer, I spent 2 decades of my career leading transformations, and you know that, right? So, but as part of that process, I developed strategies to increase operational efficiencies in the procurement area, and through that, I got deeper understanding in terms of the objectives of the DEI programs, and developed strategies to achieve the DEI goals while making sure that the objectives of the procurement process were also met. So I was very engaged in the effort in organizations like the University of Illinois, for example, because there I was the BEP Council representatives for the all of Illinois 13 campuses. So overall, my involvement has been that of an advocate because it helps augment competition that benefits the procurement outcome, and it has an economic and social impact as well.
Well, based on your experiences then, what tips would you give to agencies interested in starting and growing their own DEI program?
So I think the first thing, Keith, is to have a good understanding of the purpose of the program. Then, of course, the requirements. You want to know who's out there, who's interested, and what's the landscape in terms of the dynamics around the topic and in the actual environment in the organization. Before you go start recruiting firms, I want to make sure that I understand, that you understand it in, if you're growing your program or trying to grow your program, you want to understand, make sure that your procurement house is in order, and that you understand what are some of the challenges that surround these opportunities, or maybe the reluctance, or maybe competition. So you must have your procurement house in order. And so it's your process. So and so you want to know, is it transparent? Is there trust in the process? Or is there a trust issue that you need to fix? Is it easy to do business with your agency? Or does it take an extraordinarily long time to go through the process? You want to identify who's out there advocating, maybe professional organizations, chambers of commerce, interest groups, other agencies, maybe they can help you identify issues as well as help disseminate information. The organizations can invite you to speak to their members at their events. So you want to develop those relationships. It helps to create sort of a network of support in your for your efforts. So you don't want to go at it alone. So in just a few words, don't go at it alone. Get help and see how you can develop relationships so that can happen.
That's great. And having said that, oftentimes I recognize that additional impetus is often required to help grow a DEI program. And one method I know about is to help an organization move forward is to commission a disparity study, recognizing that these studies could be moderately expensive. How would you leverage a disparity study to grow a DEI program?
That's a good point, Keith. I think the disparity study is going to equip you with information to establish a comparison between your current supplier pool and that which exists out in the community. Do they look the same? Is in terms of a representation, right, of the different groups. It will help you build the case for a program if it reveals that perhaps the process or circumstances are impeding the entrance of DEI suppliers into your pool of suppliers that are with contracts in your agency. That type of study informs you of the areas where there is greater opportunity for DEI firms to participate so that the agency can establish realistic and achievable goals. It's also a way to settle a difference of opinion as to whether a DEI program is necessary or even appropriate, so that the decision is based on facts. It provides the factual base for the decision making.
Okay, well, is there anything else you'd like to add to the discussion today?
Well, I guess I want to say that it's important to be mindful that simply putting information out there in your website is not enough. There must be an active strategy like outreach. Otherwise, it's like putting the most amazing restaurant in an island or in the middle of the desert and not telling anyone. So why would anyone come, right? So if you don't tell them about it. So you have to build that bridge of information.
Wow, that's great. I really appreciate you being with us here today, but we're just about out of time. So I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And as always, I want to remind you that you can find the NIGP mentorship program at www.nigp.org/mentorship. So
thank you, Keith.
Thank you. I'm saying now that this is Keith Glatt speaking, and hoping that you'll join us again next time on Way to Grow, and reminding you that this is Radio NIGP.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kirk Buffington here with Radio NIGP. And this afternoon, we're speaking with Todd Slater, who is NIGP's Chief Content Officer. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Leadership Summit, which is coming up in February. Good afternoon, Todd.
Good afternoon, Kirk. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Leadership Summit. What's on the table coming up in February?
Yeah, so we're excited again for this year. This will be really the second time with Leadership Summit. It'll be February 22nd to the 24th. We're going to Houston, Texas, a little bit warmer than we were last year in St. Louis. So we wanted to kind of go a little bit warmer this year. But we have a lot of good things in store, a lot of good takeaways that we had from, the first summit and, just looking to enhance it this coming year in February.
Okay. All right. If I recall, you had tracks in the last summit. So are you kind of doing the same thing this year?
Yeah. So the whole concept around summit is to be able to bring our three key cohorts of leadership together. So right now, we have Edge, Leaders Edge, designed for those that are emerging leaders, right? Are just either brand new to the space or want to go into the space. So it focuses on them. That's a 5-month program. So they're meeting virtually prior to February and the summit. Then they come together in person, go deep into some concepts that are better taught in person, conflict, communications. Then they'll meet again afterwards. But then we also bring our chapter leaders, right? Our chapters are extremely important to us. So the chapter leaders come together, probably about 80 to 100 of our chapters leaders come together. But their focus is on, how to run an effective chapter. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with membership and leadership in that perspective? And then the final component is the impact cohort. And those are our mid to senior level managers that come together. They will also have virtual sessions before and after, and that's new this year.
Great. Chapter leadership is so critical. And I came up through the chapter, both as a vice president and a president. And I think one of the things that we tend to, I don't want to say fail, but one of the things that we're not as good as we should be is preparing folks to be leaders in the chapter. Yep. I remember one year I ended up, being president 2 years in a row. And that's great for me to learn leadership, but it's not great for members in the chapter. So I think that you have that chapter leadership track is great. I really do.
Yeah, what's interesting, Kirk? So that's a challenge, right? Is, Kirk can't do it for
forever,
18 years, forever. And you have to build those opportunities. We're actually seeing it, in the procurement space overall, and procurement as a profession's not the only, industries are facing this all over, is that it's really critical that leaders develop leaders, right? And often they don't. They're doing their thing, but they're not developing those below them. The challenge is when they retire or move on with their career, there's a huge gap.
Yep.
That can't be filled overnight. You can't fill a Kirk Buffington overnight. Those take years to build those skills. And so we're really trying to emphasize that in this training and opportunities when we gather. That's one of the big goals for us.
Good. I also like the idea of the up and coming leaders, mm-hmm. and that they have this 5-month track, and adults are so better prepared when they share experiences. Mm-hmm. I've learned that through teaching. The group activities that are part of almost all the Pathways courses are such a critical part of learning for the folks in the group.
So we're going to amp that up at the summit, right? So this is a place where networking and connecting are critical. So we're enhancing that this year, because one of the reasons why we want to bring people together is to, emerging leaders be able to have a conversation with more of those that have been in the profession for some time, build those relationships, learn from each other, right? Don't learn in a vacuum, learn through Kirk and others that have been there. So this is a great way. So we're going to spend a lot of time in team buildings, cross-cutting activities. Every morning we gather like we did last year, but we'll do these cross-cutting plenary sessions where we talk about common topics, the importance of a leadership mindset, and some others, right? So that we all have a chance to talk about it from different angles and different perspectives. So It's a lot of hands-on, a lot of discussion. It's not a lot of lecture. So when you come, it's not a sitting back and listening. You got to get in and talk. It's going to pull you out of your comfort zone, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, that really sounds great, Todd. I know it's going to be an exciting event. Registration is open, I assume.
Yep, early bird now until December 1st, and then it'll quit. Yep.
Okay, great. So anything else you'd like to add before we close out the segment?
No, I don't think so. That covers it. I guess just one real kind of closing is, this year we're narrowing our focus down. So the topic is all around how are we building, how are we addressing the talent changes? I hear talent challenges. I hear so often the challenges we're facing. I can't hire. I can't keep them. I can't motivate. So it's all around how do we create that culture that attracts, retains, and develops the top people for you guys in order to you guys to be successful. So we're really digging in there. There's even conversation of maybe it's time for a whole new model that needs to be created. So maybe we'll build a whole new model out of this experience. So get ready to kind of roll up your sleeves and kind of venture into some uncharted territory. But it'll be exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Todd, for sharing a little bit of your time today and talking about the Leadership Summit. I think we will probably have another session to keep it on focused for our members. But again, thank you so much. And for all of you out there, this is Kirk Buffington, Todd Slater, talking about Leadership Summit. And this is Radio NIGP.
Hello and welcome to Radio NIGP After Hours. My name is Bobby Tolston, and I'm joined here today by Kate Rotello, Kirk Buffington, and Keith Glass. So Kate, let's start with you. Can you give us a brief idea about who you are?
Yeah. Hi. So my name is Kate Rotella, and I am the Director of Fiscal Affairs and Acquisitions and Auxiliary Services for Eastern Connecticut State University. I have been in procurement for well over 25 years, and today's discussion is really important to me. And, it's about exploring our supplier diversity pool and our programs and how that benefits our community. When we're engaging and investing in our smaller businesses and embracing inclusivity, we're creating that ripple effect in economic growth in our communities, but also job creation, right? At a local level, at a state level, and at a national level too. What we do matters. But this is also feeds into our sustainable procurement models, which is really important to all of us, right? So sustainable procurement is not just about, right? People think it's about green purchasing, and that's not what it's about. It's about being sustainable. And we're going to talk about different ways that this model will help us be sustainable. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. And I'll shift over to Kurt. He's next on my screen. So Kurt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hi, Bobby and Keith and Kate. It's great to be here. My name is Kirk Buffington. I am retired, but I am the former director of both finance and procurement services at the city of Fort Lauderdale. I have a little over 30 years in public procurement. Diversity, equity, inclusion are all very important. We had some programs going in Fort Lauderdale, but I think Kate has really hit the point about sustainability. And people think, oh, the green purchasing, recycled paper. How do you maintain a sustainable workforce if you don't have the right things in place in your community for them to make a living wage and to be able to lease affordable space? That is really sustainability when it comes to procurement. But I'm really happy to be here. This is my first segment of After Hours.
Thank you so much, Keith. Kirk, and you made an excellent point with expand and sustainability and what that means. And it's not necessarily about green programs for which now I'm responsible for. So given a different perspective about sustainability, I love it. And Keith, last but not least, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hello. I'm Keith Glatz. I'm the purchasing contract manager for the city of Tamarack, Florida. We're a smaller city, but I've been in this business for 45 years now. And although I'm in a smaller community, these requirements for sustainability are just as important. We have a community that's growing ever more diverse, and we want to be able to support our community members and our small businesses. And we really feel that having a program of some kind, whether formal or informal, is extremely important to move everything forward in the entire profession.
Yes, I agree 100%. So when we think about minority programs, in the past, we hear that you have to have a disparity study in order to have a program. So I'd like to start with you, Kate. Kurt, what do you think about having a disparity study as it relates to having a program? Do you think you need a disparity study to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion type program?
Okay, well, thank you, Bobby. Well, first, you do not have to have a disparity study in place. That's not what the law currently says. And if you're familiar with the Croson decision, which was the one that coined, well, actually, they never used the term disparity in their decision, but they talked about having to have the statistical validation of any program you put in place. So you do not have to have that study to put a program in place that you're trying to, and I think a lot of it is you're trying to reflect your own community. Keith just said, our communities are more diverse. How can we be a government serving our community if we don't reflect our community?
Yes. Yes. Excellent point.
If you have a program and you get challenged on it, then you may be asked, where's your study?
Yes. Yes. I like it very much. So let's switch gears a little bit here. So, Kate, tell me, based on your experience, what has changed in the last 2 years when we talk about disparity studies, diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to state legislation?
So I think depending on the state you're in, right, there have been a lot of changes in state legislation. But in regards to disparity studies, I think Kirk is absolutely on point with that. It's not necessarily legislated, right? But you do need to be able to defend whatever program you have. And I think that's an important piece of it, right? But to Keith's point also, we have to represent our communities. And that's really important. And every community looks different, right? But back to that sustainability method, right? If we have those programs set up where we are representing our community, right? And we're working with our state legislature to talk about what we need in this legislation for SBEs or MBEs or WBEs or whatever we're calling it, in this diversity, equity, and inclusion realm, right? When we work with them, it's really important to make it so that the supplier can get engaged in the program. So we have a great supplier diversity SBE program here. We call it SBE, WB, MB program. But it's difficult for our suppliers to register because you know why? Because they're small, because they don't have the time, because it takes all sorts of time and energy to enroll in these, and they're overwhelmed, right? So the legislative intent, and this is what I talk about a lot of time, the legislative intent that goes behind these programs is meant to engage our Main Street suppliers, our Main Street USA vendors, right? Suppliers, our businesses, our small businesses. And unfortunately, what happens is those vendors, those suppliers aren't registering because it takes so much time. So what I've started to do is have these training programs where we get them registered, where we partner with the SBA through the Federal Bureau, right? To get them a SAM number. And then we partner with our state association to actually get them registered. That's what started to change, is from our seats seeing that we have to help. We have to be included. We have to help them get registered and get involved in these programs. And I think, if we've learned anything in the last 2 years or 3 years, it's that we need to be a little more self-reliant on our supply chain here in the US.
Yes, yes. It definitely brought out something that had been lurking in the woods for a long time. Now it's front and center. So, Keith, talk to us a little bit about how that looks from your perspective. What has changed in the last 2 years with you and where you are legislatively?
So legislatively, we have strengthened some of our programs, and we have also tried to make it easier, gotten us to go out. So our state department for registration for supplier diversity has gone out and started to host these kind of town halls, we'll call them, where suppliers can go and register. We have good legislation here in our state. I know there are other states that can speak to legislation that is different in their states. But for us, we're really involved in that program.
Thank you, Kate. So, Keith, what's going on in Florida where you are in the last couple of years as it relates to legislation? What has changed?
Well, I've actually had a constraint added to us in the most recent legislative session, and that we cannot utilize DEI information as an award criteria. And that was just passed in the most recent session of our legislature. So what that does is that challenges us. And to Kate's point, what we have to do is the key is being proactive.
Mm-hmm.
And going out and making these efforts on your own to the individual supplier community groups. So we've done some things similar to what Kate has done. We have partnered with our local small business administration, which has been extremely helpful. We work with our state's management services supplier diversity office, and we get a little more local. We've worked with our local urban league in our county, which has been quite helpful. And many of these entities have vendors, suppliers that are registered in their system, and we leverage that by making sure that the organizations that we are working with have access to our solicitations so that they can register for ours as well. And the small business small business administration, working with them on areas such as the SAM number, but we're getting the raw information to them. We've also worked with local contractors association. We have a minority construction contractors association that we've been working with fairly closely. And I've been involved in these efforts for, I've been 45 years, probably maybe 40 of those years. And we used to use the term, and you remember probably back in Illinois, Bobby, contacts for contracts.
Yes. Yes, I do. And we talked about that a lot during our Apple and MAP meetings, right? We were going to state, local. Yeah, we were really heavy into this when we worked together in Illinois. And from those experiences, I found that some of those challenges still exist today. So, Kurt, tell me, what have you done to create programs to engage suppliers such as small businesses and others within your communities during your career?
Well, a couple of things we did at Fort Lauderdale, and obviously I'm not actively managing these kinds of programs today, but I'm still very involved. I do some consulting and I advocate for these kind of, as Keith has very well said, we have to be proactive. When I was with Fort Lauderdale, we did not have set aside programs, quota programs, however you want to define them. We were proactive. We encouraged. But we didn't just say the words. I mean, we were actively out there doing the trade shows, doing the reverse trade shows, approaching the local construction groups, the small businesses, because the crux, and Kate said it very well, it's getting our Main Street, I think you said Main Street, the Main Street suppliers. I mean, that's really what the programs are about. So getting out there and talking to community associations and talking to the small groups, the chambers of commerce, all those kinds of things. Trying to make, one of my goals was always trying to make supplier registration as easy as possible.
Yes.
It is difficult to do business with the government. All the stuff we require, we need to, and I'm not advocating to eliminate things that we may require. There are reasons we require certain things. But I'm going to pick on Illinois just a little bit. Because I remember years ago, I was teaching in Illinois, actually Champaign-Urbana. And I was listening to some of the state purchasing folks talk about all the things that had to be included with the bid response. I mean, there must have been a dozen different affidavits that had to be submitted and notarized. And I understand why the state had flipped that way, but it makes contracting with the government difficult. And in order to at least get a bid, I mean, ultimately, they have to bid, they have to participate and provide a good product or a good service. But we've got to get them in the door.
Yes, I agree 150%, Kurt. And what brings to my mind is the word sustainability, which is what we were talking about earlier. So align our need to expand our supplier base with sustainability for me. Kate, when you think about sustainability, how do we create these programs and make them sustainable?
Yeah. So, thanks so much. And, first, let me just lead into that with, some of the programs I've created here, which are now sustainable here. I have an annual program I do on our university's campus. I partner with the SBA, and I encourage everybody to get to know their small business association representative for their region, right? So they have districts or regions, and partner with them. Partner with your chambers of commerce. I partnered with all the chambers of commerces here in my particular county, in addition to partnering with some of the minority contracting businesses that we have in the state. And I had our state agency here that actually registers these suppliers, right? So when we talk about registering suppliers, there's registration within your city or government or county as a supplier, but there's also the actual certified registration for a small business. So here in Connecticut, our legislation says to be considered for that 25% set aside, you have to be a registered SBE, right? Or MBE or WBE. You have to fit into that program. And getting into that program it's not hard. It's just time consuming. Like Kurt said, we also make people certify 100 different forms. It's ridiculous. I understand why it's there, but it's overwhelming. I put a bid out at one point here for a very small contract, and the bid itself was like 150 pages. And I said, look, guys, small businesses don't have time to read this. Like, it's very simple. Let's simplify this process. And one of the things, besides the programs that I've set up that are annual. And I additionally at my program, I always have legislators there. So as a former legislator myself, I bring in legislators. So I brought in our Secretary of State, who's very involved in small businesses and getting them registered, in addition to the local small business, the local legislators in this area. So I think that's also important. And the suppliers loved it. I had a lab that they could register, a computer lab where they could register. And so those have been sustainable. Those events have been sustainable. In addition to attending local like job fairs. They have these reverse trade show job fairs for contractors. And so I think that's really important to also get involved in. And yes, Kurt, it was Main Street USA that I had said, and that is it, right? It's the legislative intent behind the rules. And that's what we have to try to remember and focus on. And additionally, I also partner with, and I think this is an important piece of it for us, the regulatory agency, to make sure you're fulfilling these requirements is CHRO, Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. So I also partner with them and bring them in because that's what overwhelms the suppliers, right? They're like, wait a minute, I don't know how to file all these forms. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Now I got to keep track of things. And so I think it's really important for them to see them as a partner and understand that they're there to help. So
yeah. And education is very important to sustainability, right? Because our rules change, because legislation changes, educating our suppliers is the one way that we can ensure sustainability. How do you see sustainability and diversity, equity, and inclusion pan apart in your agency's program, Keith?
Well, number one, we are trying to reflect the community's interests. And when we reflect the community's interests, then we have greater success with our other programs in the community, not just the procurement side, but with other programs that the city wants to have in place with the community. But I think going back to what Kate just said, I think for us, we believe that there's not only an outreach element, but there's a process element involved. And we have worked very hard to make sure that our process is consistent. We make sure that we always contact the SBA when we put out an invitation to bid or an RFP. We always contact the state and ask them to provide us with their vendors that they feel could meet these requirements. So those organs, as well as our local Broward County, Florida, who has an Office of Economic and Small Business Development. And they are able to assist our supplier community with some of these issues with registration and what such. They have a very robust program. But by using the process, that has created a great boon for us in our responses, because now we're getting firms that had never thought of responding rather than just relying on the advertisement that we might put in the newspaper or even on our website. We being proactive has helped us considerably. And I would say the last 3 to 4 construction contracts we've had have gone to a minority-owned vendor.
Wow.
Not the same one, but different ones. And so
Even better.
I believe we're seeing some success.
Good.
I would agree that when you start to award contracts to minority-owned firms in your construction arena, to me, that leads to a successful program, because in times past, we thought success was those small $5,000 and $10,000 contracts. And we know that from a sustainability perspective, a small company cannot sustain itself on small contracts like that. So I'm very pleased to hear that they're moving into the construction arena where there's definitely a bigger payoff there.
And being successful at it.
Yes. So, Kurt, talk to me about legislation DEI and sustainability, and how all of these things in some ways lead to the success or failure of these small and local minority businesses?
Well, legislation, we all, when you teach intro, if you've ever taught intro to public procurement,
yes,
we start in the very beginning saying the government sector uses procurement to enact and implement social programs. So from the very beginning, the government has tried to use procurement as one way to enact their social programs. Now, what I see happening, and because I am retired, I spend much of my time looking at legislation, looking at court cases. There is a definitive move toward there not just being an equal platform, but that some states are making it much more difficult for the government sector to have DEI programs. Now, whether that moves into the private sector, there's no way of knowing. But I think we need to recognize that there is a move, there is a swing coming. In July, a federal appellate court put out a decision in Ultima, and it was Ultima Service Corp v. the United States Department of Agriculture. It had to do with a small SBA program. So the decision is very narrowly tailored to a very specific program. But it is the first federal program first federal decision that found that some preference programs, some diversity programs may in fact be found unconstitutional because they do not protect equal rights across the board of all contractors or equal protection. So I see that, really being a harbinger of something very decisive coming down the road in the next couple of years as other cases move through the federal courts. For us at the local level, as much as we can, we need to be, as Keith has said multiple times, be proactive, but also be fair.
Yes.
And that's really the bottom line, is being proactive and fair to all of the contractors.
Yes. Yeah. So as we wind up or wind down on our after hours, I'd like to go around the horn and allow each one of you to make any, for the sake of thinking about, here comes the judge, any closing argument that you'd like to make. So Kate, I'd like to start with you.
So I would like to say, I think it's really important that people think and remember that what we do matters. We make an impact every day in what we do. And when we make a conscious effort to engage and invest in smaller businesses and embracing inclusivity, right, we're not only creating that ripple effect that we've been talking about of economic growth in our community, but we're also creating sustainability in the procurement cycle itself. I also want to say this. What's striking to me as we were talking through this, right? And as we have so many other conversations, is that instead of saying we posted our bid in the paper, we hope you saw it, we're talking about how we are reaching out to suppliers, how we're getting them engaged with our businesses, right? How we're making that reach out. And for those of us, all of us here who have been in this role for 20 plus years, that's a change. That is a significant change, especially in the last 2 and 3 years, right? Prior to that, we may have only been doing that and saying, hey, we posted it, you didn't see it, too bad, right? But now we're wanting to get involved, and we're wanting to make a difference, and we're wanting to make that difference in our communities. And I think that's really important and really great. So remember, what we do matters.
Yes, and I agree 150%. Here in the state of Maryland, one of our state agencies annually holds a outreach event, and they invite all of the districts school districts, every type of government agency gets an invitation to that annual event, and it grows year over year. So you're right, and everyone has said that being proactive is important, but going that extra step is also important to sustainability. So Keith, what do you like to add?
Well, not only does our contribution add to this level of sustainability for our individual communities, I believe as we embark on these efforts, we also improve the strategic position of public procurement in all of our organizations. And that by itself, to me, is a great end goal.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Kurt, take us home.
Well, I think ultimately we, regardless of whether you work at the local level, the state level, we have to reflect our communities.
Yes.
That's the bottom line. The other point that I think has been talked about, the sustainability issue, gone are the days, excuse me, gone are the days that we can just say, well, I got 500 bidders, or 500 bidders looked at it. We can't do that anymore. The COVID and the pandemic have clearly strained our supply chain, and we have to be proactive, whether we are advocating for a DEI program or just trying to get some bids in.
Yes.
Got to be more proactive.
Absolutely. So thank my guests for joining us for this After Hours, Kurt Buffington, Keith Glatz, and Kate Botello. I am Bobby Tolston. We are here at Radio NIGP. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you back here again real soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.